Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. My name is Yvonne Ewang. I'm a legal officer within the Secretariat. I will just, for the very start of the presentation, set off my video, just so that you can see my face. I know that there are many of you that I know already. I see some very familiar names, but at least this way you can put a face to the name. So welcome to the webinar. I will turn off my video now for saving the bandwidth for streaming purposes. Thank you very much for your time in joining this webinar. It is the first of a series of webinars, and the hope is that we can help you in preparing for the very important date of the 1st of January 2021. I see some participants who will be very familiar with this topic. We have our former COP president with us, as well as the chair of the contact group on plastic waste at the last meeting of the Conference of the Parties. So welcome to all, and I may well be calling on some of you as resource persons for the question and answer session later on. Going straight into the presentation. Just to give some background to those who may be a little less familiar with the topic, we will be focusing on the amendments related to plastic waste that were adopted in May 2019 at the 14th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. And the idea is that because these entries are due to take effect from the 1st of January 2021, the Secretariat would like to provide you with some support so that there can be action taken before this date, and you can prepare for the effective date rather than trying to do so retrospectively. So hopefully by the time we get to the 1st of January 2021, everything can be in place and parties can already start implementing the amendments. So as I mentioned, this will be the first of a series of three webinars, and the first is this that will also be repeated on Friday afternoon, and it relates to the legal and institutional steps that parties could take to implement the amendments when it relates to plastic waste. We will also have a second set of webinars on the 7th and 8th of September that will look at technical aspects, and that includes as related to the plastic waste technical guidelines. So there will be a slightly different focus there, and for that you will have my colleagues from the Scientific and Technical Assistance branch leading your discussions. And then at the end of September, we would also have a series on enforcement aspects. So looking at, first of all, what needs to be in place in terms of the framework as the basis for implementing these amendments, then looking at the technical aspects for implementation, and lastly, how to enforce that, how to make sure that your stakeholders are complying with what you've put in place as measures at the national level. And so for these other webinars, there is already some information online, and there will be further information posted shortly. So you can already go to the convention website and register for example, the technical aspects webinars as well, and shortly also for the last series on enforcement. So what are the plastic waste amendments? And again, I'm conscious that a lot of you will be very familiar with this. This is more for a refresher and to help those who maybe are coming into this with a little less familiarity with the topic. So these were adopted with the aim of trying to enhance the control system that's been set up by the Basel Convention as it relates to transboundary movement of plastic waste, and to clarify the scope of the convention as it applies to those wastes. So the thinking behind that was that you would have three different sets of amendments that were made. The first being inserting a new entry into Annex II, which is a list of other wastes. And there's a new entry, Y48, which covers plastic waste, including mixtures, unless these are hazardous. When they are categorized as hazardous, they'd fall under the entry in Annex VIII, which is again the new entry, A3210. And the presumption is that the wastes that are listed in Annex VIII are hazardous, although you can use the hazard characteristics in Annex III to show that a waste is not hazardous. And then the third set of amendments was to Annex IX, which are wastes that are presumed non-hazardous, again with the possibility of using the hazard characteristics to prove that or to establish that is not the case. The amendment to Annex IX replaces what is an existing entry. So you have B3010, and that will be in place for the parties who have agreed to be bound by this amendment. The entry B3010 will be in place until the 31st of December 2020. And then at the end of this year and going to the 1st of January 2021, it would be replaced by a new entry, B3011, which clarifies the type of plastic waste that are presumed to be not hazardous and so would not be subject to the control procedure. Just as a quick run through of what that would include, it would be a group of cured resins, non-halogenated and fluorinated polymers, provided that the waste is destined for recycling in an environmentally sound manner. So bringing in one of the pillars of the Basel Convention when it comes to environmentally sound management, and that those wastes are almost free from contamination and other types of waste. It also includes mixtures of plastic wastes, including polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET, provided that they're destined for separate recycling of each material, and again in an environmentally sound manner, almost free from contamination and other types of waste. We do have a set of frequently asked questions that have been developed and are available to you on the convention website. It may well be that some of you have already consulted that. And these resources will carry on growing as we go along. So turning to the topics that we'll focus on today and looking at the issue of legal and administrative frameworks, the general approach is that in order to, and again, this depends very much on your legal framework and the system within your country, but usually you'll find that there needs to be some action taken at the national level in order to implement the convention. There have been a set of tools and guidance developed within the context of the Basel Convention to support not only establishing those frameworks for the first time, but looking at how to further develop and revise them. So providing support to parties all the way along the evolution of the convention. When it comes to legal and administrative frameworks, there are two materials in particular that are of assistance. The manual for implementation of the Basel Convention, which includes a checklist for the legislator. And that checklist can be used pretty much as a reference that you can have side to side with your text of national legislation to see if the provisions of the convention and the obligations that each party has are incorporated into your national legislation. So, for example, do I have a definition of hazardous waste? I can tick that against the checklist. So that's intended as an easy-to-use guide. Another specific material tool for you would be the Guide for Development of National Legal Frameworks. And that is quite a detailed document that it goes in depth through both the drafting process when it comes to national laws and other measures. So it looks at what modalities you could use for incorporating the convention into your national framework. It looks at how you could involve stakeholders in the drafting process, whether that's within the ministries or interagency cooperation, or looking at a wider involvement of stakeholders. It goes through issues of information exchange, both at the national level and at the international level. And there is also a section on ensuring effective implementation and enforcement. When it comes to issues of the actual implementation itself and enforcement, you do also have materials such as the Guide to the Control System, which is aimed at let's say, a wider audience. It's looking at those who are involved in transboundary movements of hazardous waste. So that's quite a useful instruction manual for those who are involved in the control procedure. And then there is also guidance on the specific issue of illegal traffic, which my colleague Tatiana will delve into in much more depth when you look at the enforcement side of implementation in the last set of webinars. All of these are available online, but if you do have any difficulties with downloading, please do feel free to get in touch with the Secretariat, and we can certainly arrange for those to be transmitted to you. Turning to what specific steps a party needs to take, it is actually an obligation, and there are various obligations under the convention for parties to adopt appropriate legal, administrative, and other measures to implement and enforce the convention. It's up to each party to decide what measures it adopts and whether those fulfill the obligations under the convention. We, for example, as the Secretariat, do not look at national legislation that's transmitted to us with that eye. It would be certainly for each party to make that determination. The convention also allows flexibility there, so it could be a legal measure, or an administrative measure, or another measure. So we have heard of parties who, for example, adopt a framework law and then have either secondary legislation after that, or other regulations and administrative instructions to give effect to the more technical, detailed provisions of the convention that may need a lighter process or a faster process, more dynamic, to be adjusted in the future. One thing that is important to say is in relation to the plastic waste amendments, these are an integral part of the convention. The amendments change the entries for those specific wastes in the three annexes that we were referring to earlier, but they do not change the control procedure. So you still have the requirement of notifying that there's a transboundary movement taking place, getting consent, issuing the movement document, the transboundary movement, and then confirming that those wastes have been managed in an environmentally sound manner. It's also for this reason that the tools and the guidance that we referred to earlier on that cover the Basel Convention as a whole are also extremely relevant when it comes to the plastic waste amendments. It's to say that quite often you will find that there may be measures that have already been adopted, implemented, that relate to the Basel Convention. And those could be generic, as we refer to the environmental framework law, or they could be specific. So having, for example, a regulation on transboundary movements of hazardous waste. And you may find that that already allows you to, within your country, to implement the plastic waste amendments. These are all parts of the machinery that parties could put in place between now and January to assess exactly what is the situation within their country and what else would be needed. But we'll look at that in a minute. Just to add that in terms of resources that may be useful to you, you may wish to have a look at the National Legislation Collection. And I do apologize. But you could look at these texts that have been transmitted by parties to the Secretariat. And those are a constantly evolving body. So we're always updating, we're always making those texts available to you as parties. And there is also a significant body of work that has been done by the Implementation and Compliance Committee, and that continues to be done on the issue of national legislation. In fact, the guidance I was referring to just a minute ago on the development of national legal frameworks was developed within the context of the Implementation and Compliance Committee. So that's also something that is available as a resource to parties. So what concretely do we need to look at going forward? Firstly, there should be some kind of an evaluation or an analysis at the national level to look at if there are any existing measures that have been adopted to transpose the Basel Convention into the national legal framework. And as mentioned at the start, it's up to each party to decide whether there's specific action needed, what specific action has been taken, and whether this is adequate or not. Different countries have different traditions. So in some countries, there can be a direct application of what's been adopted at the international level. And in other countries, there need to be implementing measures to give effect to the amendments. So we would certainly strongly recommend a communication between those who are implementing the convention and, for example, if you have a legal department or if you have colleagues who are involved in the legal measures and legal framework at the national level, to initiate that, if it's not already been done, to initiate that evaluation or that analysis, and to see what the tradition would be within your country. It may well be that this is already something that is underway, something that has been completed. And so for those who are already along that path, congratulations. For those who are still undertaking actions in that respect, there is assistance available to support you, and we'll look at the sources of that assistance in a minute. The intention being to help you identify what elements would be needed to fully implement these amendments at the 1st of January 2021. As mentioned at the start of the presentation, the hope is in that providing you with support beforehand, we can already hit the ground running and not have to wait when we arrive to the effective date. That will also contribute to having full implementation, and hopefully by having this conversation at the international level, that can stimulate further communication and conversation, and thereby facilitate a common understanding of what is needed for implementation, as well as, for example, the understanding of the provisions and the amendments themselves. So, as mentioned, it's important to analyze where your country is in terms of the legal and institutional frameworks, and that can be not only identifying what is there, but any gaps or needs, as well as any challenges and opportunities. The Secretariat is also open to receiving information and needs from parties that have been identified at this stage, and there is a possibility at this stage when you're doing that analysis to look at the approach that's been taken so far by your country and to determine whether there is a need for a change. So, for example, it may well be that your country initially was either directly applying or chose to have implementation by secondary legislation only, basing it on a primary piece of legislation. But then you choose to change approach and to have a specific piece of legislation on transboundary movements of wastes. This is all part of the thinking that you could have as you are looking at the amendments and seeing what might be needed to prepare for the 1st of January date. You could refer to the tools and guidance. So, for example, having the checklist for the legislator next to you as you go through this kind of analysis at the national level. And it's also from the information that the Secretariat has received from parties who have undergone this within the context of, for example, the wider implementation of the Basel Convention, the issue of stakeholder consultation and discussion with the different agencies, the different stakeholders, be they private, public, civil society. That involvement can be extremely helpful for improving implementation at a later stage. In some of your countries, you may even find that public consultation is obligatory. So again, it's important at this point in time to link up with those who are involved in development and revision of legal and institutional frameworks at your national level. Another source of assistance for you that could help would be other parties. So you could, for example, look at whether other parties have transmitted to the Secretariat texts of measures that they've adopted that specifically relate to plastic waste. There could be initiatives at regional level to have a discussion within your region to have a coordinated approach when it comes to plastic waste or to the convention as a whole. There could be within that context or separately between several parties or bilaterally an exchange of experiences and information. So there could be a wealth of information that is available to you, both within the national level, so involving, for example, the plastic waste generators or the recyclers, but also at the regional and the international levels. So it's good to get that discussion already going. So in terms of what other elements could be considered when you're looking at steps to put in place for the plastic waste amendments, it's looking at what do I already have in place? Are they sufficient? What is the capacity at the national level? So who would be implementing this? Do they need any additional mandate, any additional support? What else is needed, and how could that be achieved? And that may well be, I think it's important to bear in mind the date of 1st of January, but it's also important to look longer term. And so it may well be that you consider a stepwise approach, looking at what is needed for 1st of January, but what would be needed longer term or medium term as well. It's important to have clear mandates and roles and responsibilities as for the different stakeholders, as well as involving them at an early stage. You could also look at coordination mechanisms. So between the different stakeholders that you identify who are involved in transboundary movements of plastic waste, to see what mechanisms exist, whether there are any additional measures needed, whether you already have all of the stakeholders involved. It may well be that, for example, you decide to involve a wider group of recycling facilities. It may well be that there is some informal collection body that could be included in your analysis and further steps forward. It may well be that you need involvement of some laboratories. I see that there is also a very good suggestion from one of our participants that the capacity of customs officers is also important, and that links in with the last point about enforcement and the powers that enforcement agents have. We will certainly be looking at that in the with the specific focus of how to ensure a good enforcement mechanism in the last set of webinars as well. So there are various different stages. It's important to bear in mind that implementation of the plastic waste amendments are closely linked to implementation of the convention itself. And so these are very, very closely associated issues. It's also a new, the clarification is additional to what existed previously. So this area will be evolving as we go forwards, and there will be new and additional and specific information that may be available in the future. So, for example, there have been a set of projects that have already been initiated thanks to funding from NORAD. And one of these, as an example, is a project on implementation of the plastic waste amendments in Ghana. And so there may be some information that could help parties going forwards, and that will be made available on the Basel Convention website. It's also important to note that information is being collected in relation to plastic waste under the decision BC 1413, which were additional measures to support the amendments adopted. So these need to be considered hand in hand as well. The issue of capacity for identifying the plastic wastes that are falling within the scope of the amendments will be addressed in the next webinar on technical issues. And there may already be information available from other parties. So it's also another reason to have that information and that conversation started amongst the parties. And there is also international cooperation and ongoing efforts, both with other parties and with other stakeholders. As mentioned before, there is a lot of work that's being done on national legislation by the Implementation and Compliance Committee. There are also regional centres, the Basel Convention regional centres, that are also very firmly involved in some of the pilot projects that are being undertaken. And there is also the UNEP special program on strengthening legal and institutional frameworks. So there's a whole host of assistance that is available. And what is listed there is just a sample. There is a lot of interest and a lot of activity in relation to plastic waste. So this is a very dynamic topic. It is still evolving. And there is still a lot of information that's being collected and that will be made available on the Basel Convention website. And that will be for a host of different stakeholders. So you'll have the more in-depth technical guidelines that are for stakeholders who are familiar with the issue, but you'll also have fact sheets, frequently asked questions that could help you if you are reaching out to those who are less familiar with the topic. So hopefully with those tools and with that conversation started at the different levels, that will set the parties forward for a strong basis going into the effective date for the amendments. And with that, I will close off the presentation from my side. I see that we already have some questions that have come through. And if you just give me a minute, I will hand back control to my colleague Dan, and then we can move into the question and answer session. Thank you.